Most people who lived through the 1990s remember exactly where they were when her name first hit the news. For nearly a year, Monica Lewinsky's face was on every magazine cover, her name was a punchline on every late-night show, and her private life became the most public story in America. Then, slowly, she disappeared from the spotlight. Decades later, people are asking the same question: what happened to her, and how much is she actually worth today? The answer isn't what most people expect, and the story behind it says a lot about fame, survival, and reinvention. Monica Lewinsky was born on July 23, 1973, in San Francisco, California, into a family that already understood reinvention. Her father, Bernard Lewinsky, was an oncologist whose own family had fled Nazi Germany decades earlier, eventually settling in the United States after years of moving between countries. Her mother's side of the family carried a similarly complicated history, with roots stretching from Lithuania to China to Russia. Monica grew up in Beverly Hills in a comfortable, upper-middle-class household, attending private schools alongside the children of entertainment industry figures. On the surface, it looked like an easy life. Underneath, things were far more complicated. When Monica was a teenager, her parents' marriage ended in a difficult and public divorce. The fallout affected her deeply, and she has spoken openly in later years about how unstable that period of her life felt. She eventually transferred schools and leaned into activities like drama and choir, eventually graduating as valedictorian of her small graduating class. Friends and teachers from that era remember her as outgoing, talkative, and eager to be noticed, someone who often spoke before she thought things through. It's a personality trait that would follow her into adulthood, for better and for worse. After high school, Monica enrolled at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, where she studied psychology. During this time, she became involved in a long relationship with a former teacher, a relationship that was inappropriate given the age gap and his marital status. It was a pattern that, in hindsight, many observers point to as a warning sign of the kind of relationships she would seek out with older, powerful, unavailable men. She graduated in 1995 with her degree and, through a family connection, landed an unpaid internship at the White House shortly afterward. She had no political experience and no particular ambition toward politics. It was simply an opportunity that fell into her lap, and it would end up changing the course of her entire life. What followed is now one of the most well-documented political scandals in American history. During a government shutdown in late 1995, Monica, then just 22 years old, found herself working in close proximity to President Bill Clinton, who was 49 at the time. Over the following months, an inappropriate relationship developed between them. It played out largely behind closed doors, but it would not stay hidden for long. In 1996, Lewinsky was transferred to a job at the Pentagon, ostensibly for performance reasons, though many believe it was an attempt to separate her from the president. It was there that she met Linda Tripp, a coworker who would become one of the most consequential figures in the entire scandal. Tripp, older and more experienced in Washington's political culture, became a confidant to Lewinsky. Monica, still emotionally attached to Clinton and reeling from the end of their relationship, confided in Tripp about everything. What she didn't know was that Tripp had begun secretly recording their phone conversations. Those tapes eventually made their way to independent counsel Kenneth Starr, who was already investigating Clinton in connection with the Paula Jones lawsuit. In January 1998, the story broke publicly, and Monica Lewinsky's life was never the same again. For months, she was the most talked-about woman in the country, and not in a way anyone would want. She was trapped in her mother's apartment, unable to walk outside without being followed by cameras. Comedians built entire routines around her. Politicians used her name as a weapon. She was painted by some as an aggressor and by others as a victim of a much older, much more powerful man. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than either narrative allowed for. In August 1998, after being granted immunity from prosecution, she testified before a grand jury, an event that would ultimately contribute to Clinton's impeachment by the House of Representatives later that year, even though he was acquitted by the Senate. In the aftermath, Monica found herself in a strange position. She was globally famous, but for reasons that made it nearly impossible to build a normal career. Companies were eager to pay for interviews, and at first, that's exactly where the money came from. Her 1999 interview with Barbara Walters drew an audience of tens of millions and reportedly earned her around $1 million. Her memoir, written with author Andrew Morton, became a bestseller and brought in roughly $500,000. For a brief moment, it seemed like she had turned her infamy into financial security. But that money didn't last, and it didn't come as easily as people assumed after that initial wave. A handbag design business she launched in the early 2000s got some attention in high-end retailers but never became a lasting success. A weight loss endorsement deal collapsed within months after public backlash. A reality dating show she hosted on Fox lasted only a handful of episodes before it was canceled. Every time she tried to build something new, her past followed her into the room. Potential employers were hesitant to hire her. Business partners worried about the attention that came with her name. She has said in interviews that she once lost out on a job specifically because the employer worried it might upset Hillary Clinton, who was considering a political future of her own at the time. For years, Monica largely disappeared from public view, living overseas for stretches and turning down what she has said amounted to more than $10 million in offers for interviews, endorsements, and other deals. She has explained that many of these offers simply didn't feel right to her, that she didn't want to keep profiting off the worst chapter of her life in ways that felt exploitative rather than honest. It was a decision that undoubtedly slowed her financial recovery, but it also gave her time to figure out who she wanted to be outside of the scandal. The turning point came in 2014, when Monica wrote a lengthy personal essay for Vanity Fair titled Shame and Survival. In it, she spoke candidly about the toll the scandal had taken on her mental health and her life, and she connected her experience to a broader conversation about public shaming that was becoming increasingly relevant in the age of social media. The essay reintroduced her to the public not as a punchline, but as someone with real insight into a problem the entire culture was starting to grapple with. A year later, she delivered a TED Talk called The Price of Shame, which has since been viewed tens of millions of times. In it, she described herself as one of the first people to experience public humiliation on a global, digital scale, well before smartphones and social media made that kind of pile-on a common occurrence for private citizens as well as public figures. The talk repositioned her as an advocate against cyberbullying and online harassment, work she has continued in the years since through speaking engagements, op-eds, and collaborations with organizations focused on digital safety. From there, Monica slowly built a second act in media and entertainment, this time on her own terms. She became a producer, working on projects that revisited her own story with a level of control she never had the first time around. She served as a producer on the television series that dramatized the Clinton-Lewinsky affair, giving her direct input into how her own history was portrayed on screen. She also worked on documentary projects examining public shame and its consequences. In 2025, she launched a podcast focused on helping other people who have lived through public humiliation find a way to reclaim their stories, drawing on guests who have experienced their own versions of public scrutiny. So what is Monica Lewinsky actually worth today, at 51 years old? Despite persistent online rumors suggesting a net worth in the tens of millions, credible estimates place her net worth at a much more modest figure, generally cited in the range of $1 to $2 million. That number might surprise people who assume that being one of the most famous women in the world in the late 1990s would translate into lasting wealth. But her career tells a different story. Much of her early income came in short, one-time bursts tied to interviews and book deals rather than steady, ongoing revenue. Several business ventures that could have built long-term wealth failed to gain traction, often because of the very fame that made them possible in the first place. And she voluntarily turned down a substantial amount of money because it didn't align with the direction she wanted her life to take. In many ways, her current income now comes from a more sustainable, if less flashy, source: speaking engagements, consulting work related to anti-bullying initiatives, and her production and media projects. It's not the kind of wealth that generates headlines, but it's the kind that has allowed her to build a career with actual longevity, something none of her early opportunities were able to offer her. Monica Lewinsky's story isn't really about money at all, even though that's often the angle people are curious about. It's a story about what happens when a young person's worst mistake becomes public property, dissected by millions of strangers for their own entertainment. It's about the difference between fame and control, and how much harder it is to build something meaningful when the whole world thinks it already knows your entire story. She has said that for years she tried to outrun what happened to her, only to eventually realize that the only way forward was to face it directly and integrate it into who she is, rather than pretend it never happened. At 51, she isn't chasing the kind of wealth people assume she should have. She's built something different, a career centered on turning her most painful experience into a platform that helps other people survive their own. Whether or not that shocks you probably depends on what you expected to find. But for anyone paying close attention, her story has never really been about the money. It's been about what she chose to do after the world decided her story was over.